Question orale, oral questions. L'honorable député de Sherbrooke-Haute-Saint-Jean.
Mr. Speaker, the Public Safety Minister told the House that the RCMP had taken decisive action to close the so-called police stations. But the Beijing officials laughed at this and said they had not received any request to close from the RCMP and that they were operating normally. Can the Prime Minister tell us whether those police stations are still operative, and if so, will he shut them down? The Right Honourable Prime Minister, as the member knows full well, the RCMP is following up on this, but I'd also like to say a word about Alberta. We're working together, the Government of Canada with the Government of Alberta, to ensure that everyone affected gets the help they need.
Work with provincial officials, municipalities and Indigenous communities to support people across Alberta and across the country in any way we can. Of course, we encourage everyone to follow the advice of local authorities and stay safe, but know that all orders of government are working together to keep people safe through this difficult time.
The Honourable Member for Charlebourg-Haute-Saint-Charles. Mr. Speaker, we can see that the NDP Bloc Liberal coalition is starting to fall apart because yesterday all opposition parties voted on the Conservative motion to set up a national public inquiry into foreign election interference, to close down police stations in Canada run by Beijing. And the Liberals will take their time because these things have served them well. So the question is, why has no effort been made to shut down these illegal police stations in the Montreal area? The Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, the member knows full well that our police operate independently. We expect the police to do their job to ensure Canadians' safety, and they will continue to do that. But he's suggesting that we haven't done anything to fight foreign interference. The fact is, appointed the former Governor General as a special rapporteur who's independent to investigate and make recommendations. We're continuing our investigations. We're ensuring the smooth operation of this place by expelling foreign diplomats, and we will continue to work on these matters.
Found out that a member of this House and his family were intimidated for a vote that he cast, and 2 years since the government has known. They finally expelled the guy who did it, and that is the very least they could have done. We know more MPs have been threatened, and we can ensure the government doesn't let it happen again by bringing in a foreign agent registry. Yesterday, every Liberal on the other side voted against that. Shameful. How can Canadians believe that this government is serious about national security when they ignored the problem for 2 years and then voted against fixing it?
The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
The member opposite is being disingenuous. She knows full well that we are moving forward on establishing a foreign agent registry. We're doing it we're doing it properly so that it actually responds to the needs of Canadians. We will continue to ensure that we're standing up for our values, taking seriously these issues, which is why we did take the time to ensure that as we declared a Chinese diplomat persona non grata, it was done appropriately.
Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Speaker, the Prime Minister is being disingenuous when he tells Canadians that he's taking this seriously. We need a foreign agent registry like the one that exists in Australia and the U.S. We need a national public inquiry into foreign interference, and we need to shut down the illegal police stations operating in Canada that harass innocent civilians that the Minister of Public Safety told Canadians was already shut. They are not. Once again, he has misled Canadians. When will he end this charade?
The Honourable Prime Minister.
Foreign actors attempting to monitor, intimidate or threaten Canadians is completely unacceptable. The RCMP have said that they are actively investigating these suspected stations, and as they have done before, they won't hesitate to take action again. Everyone should feel safe in this country, and we will exhaust all efforts to protect them from unacceptable behaviour by hostile, authoritarian states.
The Honourable Member for Thornhill.
Told Canadians that the 2001 report from CSIS was never shared. We know that's false because we know the National Security Advisor had said so. She informed the member from Wellington Halton Hills of the truth. He's stalling on a foreign agent registry. He won't shut down illegal police station, and he doesn't have the courage to call a national public inquiry. Right. Why would anyone believe that he takes national security seriously?
That's right. Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, in 2015, when we took office, we committed to establish an oversight committee by parliamentarians to see and engage with our security intelligence agencies every step of the way. The Conservatives were totally opposed to that kind of oversight by parliamentarians, but we moved forward with NSICOP anyway, and that is a powerful tool that we have to ensure that Canadians are being kept safe. On top of that, we established a panel to oversee our elections in 2019-2021. That panel confirmed that the elections integrity held despite attempts by interference. We have always taken this issue seriously, and we will continue to.
The honourable member for Belleuil-Chambly. Mr. Speaker, let's talk about interference. But what interference? There was Chinese meddling in Canadian affairs, or are we talking about McKinsey meddling in Canadian affairs? McKinsey was at the origin of this proposal to have 100 million Canadians by the turn of the century, which would be a huge change. Obviously, the Prime Minister must have consulted on this. When he consulted Quebec about having a population of 100 million, what did Quebec City say? Unless he didn't actually ask Quebec what Quebec thought of this, the Right Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, our linguistic duality is a source of wealth that needs protection, and Quebec sets its own immigration targets and has exclusive power over immigrant selection. On our side, we have to make sure the economy continues to grow while protecting the French language and culture. We will still be there to protect Quebec's interests and the importance of French all across Canada. The Honourable Member for Belleuil-Chambly. I ask a question, and he just reads a heritage minute to us. So Quebec would have to take in huge numbers of newcomers, and obviously we wouldn't be able to provide services and French integration. McKinsey did not take into account the uniqueness of Quebec and the French fact, and I was told that in committee. The Prime Minister, he's a Francophone. Why does he not pay heed to the Francophone reality of Quebec? The Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, we will always pay attention to the uniqueness of Quebec. It's something that I get. I understand it full well, and we know that we have to not just protect both official languages all across the country. We have to deal particularly with the situation of French within Quebec. When it comes to federal immigration levels, that decision is made independently by departmental officials and stakeholders, provincial and territorial leaders. And we do this to determine the best immigration policy possible for Canada. The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
A serious threat to our democracy. A member of Parliament and his family were targeted by a foreign government for his vote in this House. But imagine what it's like for thousands of families across our country who flee governments that are oppressive only to come to Canada and have those threats follow them. This Prime Minister won't even call a public inquiry. How can he keep the rest of Canadians facing serious threats safe?
Hear, hear. Hear, hear. The Right Honourable Prime Minister.
Mr. Speaker, from the very beginning, we have always taken threats to Canadians around foreign interference extremely seriously, which is why we've created new mechanisms and new tools to counter foreign interference, and why we've appointed appointed an independent expert to look at the foreign interference landscape and to ensure that we have all the tools we need and to create more, including a public inquiry, if necessary. We will follow the advice of independent experts. That the expert is the one who is best placed to say how we move forward.
The Honourable Member for Burnaby South.
Let me help the Prime Minister. It is necessary. We need one. L'ingérence étrangère a un impact réel dans la vie des gens. Ça a un impact réel sur la communauté chinoise et plusieurs communautés à travers le pays. Imaginez la situation des familles qui fuient des gouvernements répressifs. Ils sont arrivés au Canada et les menacent.
Going to interrupt for a moment. I believe the translation is not working. Est-ce que vous m'entendez?
Can you hear me in English when I'm speaking French? Okay.
Member for Burnaby South, if you can start from the top, that'd be great. Thank you.
Minister, we need a public inquiry. It is necessary.
Foreign interference has a real impact on communities all across the country. Not just the Chinese community, but many other communities that are subject to intimidation. Imagine families that have fled repressive regimes to get to Canada, and they come here and they still face threats. This government is turning its back on those people. It's radio silence. They're not doing anything to protect these families. Why won't this government call a public inquiry in order to protect these people? Right Honourable Prime Minister, as my honourable colleague has pointed out, diaspora communities, be they Chinese or Iranian Canadian or Russian Canadian or Indo-Canadian, those communities are often the first to be targeted by foreign interference. And that's why we took steps to protect them. And we will continue to work together with those communities, not only to protect them against interference, but also to protect them against unfortunate racism and discrimination that's directed at them when they're suspected of being foreign agents. That's a problem we will continue to work on.
Mr. Speaker, you would think that the illegal operation of foreign agents in this country would serve as a good enough reason for these Liberals to appropriately intervene. Instead, the Public Safety Minister chooses to mislead Canadians by claiming that the RCMP have shut down all Beijing-backed police stations, when in reality, 2 Montreal groups under investigation for hosting these stations have not received any closure requests. How much longer do Canadians need to wait before this government finally closes down these illegal Beijing-backed stations?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, by now my colleague will know that the RCMP provided an update that they took action to disrupt the activities in regards to these so-called police stations. And as you heard the Prime Minister say, it is this government's expectation that if any such foreign interference activities occurs or pops up again, that they will take the necessary action to keep our community safe. More to the point, Mr. Speaker, there's $49 million to assist the RCMP in budget 2023. And instead of tough talk and saber rattling, the Conservatives should support that budget so that we can protect our communities from foreign interference.
Honourable Member for Brantford Brant.
Mr. Speaker, actions speak louder than words. Canadians deserve no less.
That's right.
This government's apathy concerning the threats of foreign interference continuously fails to protect Chinese Canadians across this country. Enough of the smoke and mirrors. Last week, on this very same topic, this minister stressed the importance of communication and transparency in this House. It's time for that minister to demonstrate it and finally answer the question: when will the government close down all these Beijing-backed police stations in Canada?
Get her done. The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, that member opposite knows full well that operational independence is a pillar of our democracy. We put and repose our confidence in the RCMP and our national security apparatus to protect our communities from foreign interference. Mr. Speaker, instead of misguided statements like the one that the member opposite just said, he should actually put the work into protecting our institutions, including the people in this chamber, and all of that is built on the foundation of the work that this government is doing since we took the reins in 2015.
The Honourable Member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
It took 2 years for the government to do the right thing and expel a diplomat who was directly involved in interfering in our democracy and intimidating the family of a member of this House of Commons for their vote in this House of Commons. Meanwhile, the dictatorship in Beijing continues to operate illegal police stations in Canada, used to intimidate members of the Chinese diaspora community. So is the Prime Minister and his Public Safety Minister going to wait 2 years, or will they commit today to shut down these foreign influence operations running out of these Beijing-backed police stations?
The Honourable Minister for Public Safety.
Mr. Speaker, as long as we get the same questions, they'll get the same answers. The RCMP has taken decisive action with regards to the foreign interference that is in relationship to these so-called police stations, and going forward, they will take the necessary steps to protect our communities. Mr. Speaker, the Conservatives talk about apathy. They were apathetic for a decade when they held the reins of government, when they could have put in place the tools, the measures, and the resources that they're now asking the government to do. We're doing that work, Mr. Speaker. They need to stop with the politicization. They need to stop with the claims of political interference and get behind the work that this government is doing.
Well, member for Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands, and Rideau Lakes.
What we'd like is for the government to actually start doing the work. And yesterday, all members on that side, including the Public Safety Minister and the Prime Minister, voted against a public inquiry. They voted against expelling a diplomat. They voted against a foreign agent registry. All of these tools can be used to protect members of the Chinese diaspora community from intimidation from the communist dictatorship in Beijing. They're operating here on our soil, and this government has the ability to stop them. So we have a very simple question, and the minister says if we ask the same question, we'll get the same answer. We'd like some action to go with it. Will they implement a foreign agent registry and shut down these Beijing-backed police stations?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, here's the record of action that this government has taken. We declared the foreign agent persona non grata. That person is now on their way out of Canada. We've put millions, hundreds of millions of dollars into the national security apparatus to give them the tools that they need to protect our communities against foreign interference, Mr. Speaker. And rather than continue to politicize this issue and make claims around apathy, they should take a look in the mirror at their own record, where for 10 years they did none of the work that they are now asking the government to do. The difference is we are doing it. We're protecting our institutions, and we're protecting the people in them.
L'honorable député de Mégantic.
The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister said today that he would launch a public inquiry into foreign interference if necessary. You know who's going to make that decision? A former administrator of the Trudeau Foundation. The Trudeau Foundation, which received illegal donations from the Beijing regime. So I can already anticipate what the special reporter's recommendation will be. Yesterday, everyone here in the House voted in favor of a national public independent inquiry into foreign interference. All members, not except for the government side. Everyone else voted in favor of it. Why is this? Why the disrespect for duly elected officials? Mr. Speaker, Mr. Johnson was the former Governor General of Canada. He's an independent-minded person. He presented a plan for taking action, or he will present a plan for taking action against foreign interference. So it's clear all the options are on the table. And as for the Pierre Elliott Trudeau Foundation, that's an independent, arm's-length foundation. The Prime Minister has no interest in that. The honourable member for Mégantic-L'Érable. The government says they are reacting. When you act, you produce results. The results of the government so far on foreign interference is 25%. 25% because they finally, after 2 years, expelled the diplomat. But nothing has been done about the foreign agent registry, nothing about an independent inquiry, and nothing about shutting down Chinese police stations in Canada. On each of these things, they've failed woefully in protecting Canadians. The question is, why? The Right Honourable Government House Leader.
Public safety at the time that Stephen Harper's government was there. And when Justice Iacobucci and Justice O'Connor issued their recommendations, saying that there was urgent action needed to take an independent parliamentary committee of parliamentarians to oversee every aspect of national security, they did nothing. It was this government that brought in that body that allowed parliamentarians of every party to be able to see into every aspect of our national security. We acted on those and many other recommendations, Mr. Speaker, that the government, that the Conservatives opposite, when they were in government, sat on and did not act upon.
The honourable member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, let's talk about the Century Initiative. Many Quebecers and French Canadians are concerned that the federal government could triple the population to 100 million people by 2100 without any public debate. The Minister of Immigration claims he's not following the Century Initiative, he's making his own choices. But coincidence or not, his immigration targets for 2023 to 2025 are directly aligned with the proposal. Will he at least confirm the facts that his target of 500,000 newcomers by 2025 is consistent with the Century Initiative and even goes a little further? The Honourable Minister of Immigration. Mr. Speaker, the federal immigration targets those goals are to grow the economy. And it is possible to grow the economy and protect the French language and the political influence of Francophones at the same time. We will continue to increase the number of Francophone newcomers. That's a good thing for our minority communities, and it's a good thing for the economy, too. The Honourable Member for Lac-Saint-Jean. Mr. Speaker, the minister boasts about 4% Francophone immigration outside Quebec, but according to the Francophone and Acadian communities, we need 12% this year and 20% in the future just to slow down the decline of French. As for Quebec, I quote the Minister of the French language, who said, "This is the fad of the century. It's not good for Quebec and it's not good for Canada." Mr. Speaker, will the minister undertake not to triple the population of Canada to 100 million people by 2100? The Honourable Minister. It's very interesting, Mr. Speaker, because it's quite clear that the Honourable Member read the McKinsey plan and the Century Initiative, but he didn't read the Government of Canada's plan. If he's interested in our plan, it's easy for me to send him an email with the chapter on levels of Francophone immigration after question period. But our priority is to increase the number of French-speaking newcomers to support minority communities and grow the economy at the same time. The Honourable Member for Longueuil-Saint-Hubert.
On est en pleine crise.
Mr. Speaker, we're in the middle of a housing crisis. It's already almost impossible to find affordable housing in Quebec. 3 weeks ago, the National Housing Council informed us that while the federal government was building 115,000 units, Canada lost 550,000 affordable units over the past 10 years. We're not moving forward, we're going backwards. For every new affordable housing unit, we're losing 5. So before you talk about tripling the population, hasn't anyone in this gang asked themselves, how are we going to house all these people? The Honourable Minister.
Merci.
Mr. Speaker, I'd like to thank the member opposite for his question.
Is actually one of the tools among a number of tools in our tool set that we use to address the skills and labor shortage within the construction and building trade sector to actually build housing for Canadians. So I would invite my honourable colleague to look at our national housing strategy, to look at the Housing Accelerator Fund, to look at the results that we've delivered through programs like the Rapid Housing Initiative, to look at programs like the Canada Housing Benefit, to see the real effects on the ground to deliver more safe and affordable housing for Canadians.
Middlesex, London.
Speaker, according to a constituent, he states, I make a decent living, making around $70,000, live within my means, no credit card debt, and my wife and I are struggling. There are no extras for our family, so we can't afford the Liberal way of living and shelling out more and more. Mr. Speaker, this is a common cry from Canadians. However, the Prime Minister is too busy on lapsed vacations to listen to Canadians who are struggling. Will this Prime Minister land his plane and start doing his job?
The Honourable Minister for Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, I want to thank that member for the question, but as Minister for Alberta, I would like to take a moment and thank first responders across this country and Canadians from coast to coast to coast for working with Alberta and coming to support us fellow Albertans as we face all the crisis with the forest fires. And on the substantive issue of affordability, our government has introduced targeted measures to make life more affordable. And today, I was at the Senate Finance Committee where we asked the senators to pass C-46. They have done so now. It's now in front of the Senate for third reading.
The Honourable Member for Elgin, Middlesex, London.
Mr. Speaker, these government government policies have made life more unaffordable. They're not working for Canadians struggling, but also for seniors on fixed income. The Prime Minister does not understand that considering 41 cents per litre added to your heat, your gas, and your food does drive up the cost of living. Seniors' budgets do not have that flexibility. So why is this Prime Minister making life harder for seniors who are already struggling? Thank you.
The Honourable Minister for Seniors.
Since 2015, we've been there supporting Canadians, including seniors, by lowering the age of retirement back to 65, by strengthening the guaranteed income supplement that has helped over hundreds of thousands of seniors, Mr. Speaker, has lifted 45,000 seniors out of poverty, by enhancing the Canada Pension Plan. Mr. Speaker, all the measures, by the way, the party opposite opposed. Mr. Speaker, Budget 2023 continues to support seniors by our new grocery rebate that is going to put more money in their pockets, by our new dental care plan that is going to get dental care that they need, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, we're here delivering for Canadians, and they can just, say all these points, which makes no sense, Mr. Speaker, and we're here delivering.
For Medicine Hat, Carson Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My constituents are sick of this Prime Minister's hypocrisy. With Alberta's average monthly salary at $5,000 a month, many struggle to make ends meet. Well, this Prime Minister spends more than that for a one-night hotel stay. $6,000 for one night. His poor decisions demonstrate just how out of touch he really is with the average Canadian. Mr. Speaker, why does this Prime Minister make Canadians pay for his lavish travel while they continue to struggle?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I greatly sympathize, obviously, as we all do, with Canadians who at a time of global uncertainty, with global inflation and the challenges that it poses, are expecting action. And that's why they expect the facts that be presented to them, like the action we're taking to help them, to be fairly presented. The fact that the member opposite talked about the night that the Prime Minister spent on the Queen's, to commemorate the Queen's death and to be there, the fact that I've iterated before, Mr. Speaker, that there was security in that room, that there was more than one room. They misrepresent facts and unfortunately continue to be personally focused on the Prime Minister.
The Honourable Member for Bellechasse, Les Etchemins-Lévis. Mr. Speaker, this Prime Minister is more disconnected than ever. Canadians are struggling because everything's more expensive: food, housing, heating. But he continues traveling the world and spending recklessly. Not even his supporters can convince him to rebalance the budget. Will the Prime Minister finally listen to reason and end these ill-advised policies that are poisoning the lives of Canadians? The Honourable Minister of Tourism. I'm very grateful that the member asked this question and said how great our Liberal convention was. Yes, it's an excellent opportunity to bring Liberals together from coast to coast to coast. But, Mr. Speaker, let's look at the facts. We have the lowest deficit in the G7, the best economy in the G7, and we are delivering the goods, and that's what it is to be a Liberal. The Honourable Member for Rosemont-la-Petite-Patrie. Mr. Speaker, Hochelaga-Maisonneuve is one of the hardest-hit neighbourhoods in Montreal by the housing crisis, and yet the Liberal member for this riding, who is in addition the Parliamentary Secretary for Housing, is refusing to meet with the Housing Hochelaga-Maisonneuve committees, and she isn't even getting them the summer job positions that would help the people in need in her riding. The Liberals are saying that solving the housing crisis is their priority, but clearly their actions show the contrary. When will the Liberals finally take the housing crisis seriously and treat it as an urgent matter? The Honourable Minister of Housing. We have been making housing more affordable for Canadians. We have built housing units, and we are doing so swiftly. That is why we are making historic investments to rapidly increase housing supply in order to put Canada on the right track to double the building of housing over the next decade. That is what federal leadership looks like on this Liberal side.
For Winnipeg Centre.
The government announced on funding for Indigenous shelters and transitional homes that they first promised 2 years ago. No shovels are in the ground yet, and it could take years before the money is spent. MPs declare the crisis of MMIWG2S an emergency, yet the Liberals have only spent 5% of the violence prevention strategy since 2020. Plus, they're cutting $150 million from women's shelters in September. Why aren't the Liberals acting with the urgency that this crisis deserves, and will they reverse the cut to women's shelters?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister for Indigenous Services.
Mr. Speaker, I'm grateful for the opportunity to talk about the investments that we're making and the announcement that the government made just this week to fund 22 shelters, women's shelters, shelters for 2S LGBTQ people fleeing domestic violence and intimate partner violence. Mr. Speaker, we've worked with communities to make sure that these shelters will be appropriate and custom built, and by the way, supported with operational funding so the communities will have the certainty that when there's trouble at home, there's a place to go.
Excellent. Excellent.
L'honorable député de London West.
Mr. Speaker, I'm a strong believer that the right to choose for women should not be politicized, and I think that many Canadians without a doubt can agree. But here we are, Mr. Speaker, politicizing how women can access health care and debating choices that they have to make. I believe that all Canadians deserve to know what the government is doing to protect the right to choose and access to important health care, including abortion. Can the Minister of Women and Gender Equality and Youth speak to how our government is increasing access to important health care issues, including abortion services? Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Minister for Women and Gender Equality.
Thank you so much to the honourable member for her question, Mr. Speaker. Access to abortion is simple. It is health care. And that is why today $4.2 million went to Action Canada and UBC to increase access to abortion. Women's rights are being attacked everywhere, Mr. Speaker, even in this country. An attack on women's rights is an attack on human rights. We will always unequivocally defend a woman's dignity and a right to choose her own future.
The honourable member for Ben Airdrie.
I love you. I love you. The Parliamentary Budget Officer reports that the Prime Minister's carbon tax will cost families in Alberta an extra $2,800 per year. For a hard-working dad in Airdrie, that could be a month's pay. For a single mom from Cochrane, that might mean 2 months' rent. And for a senior in Crossfield, that's 4 months of old age security payments. Because of the Liberal government, life costs more. Will this government finally show some compassion and axe the carbon tax?
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister for the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In this document, the platform of the Conservative Party during the last election, and
I'm just going to stop the Honourable Member for the Honourable Minister for a second. Order! Order! Order!
He's been arrested before.
Order. Okay, I just want to remind all members that if you're referring to something, it's a reference, but as soon as you hold it up and show something, I'm afraid it's a prop. So I'll let the Honourable Minister start from the top and put his prop away, or put his document again.
Put your prop away. The document called "A Man with a Plan," and I quote, "Our plan will ensure."
Gotta go to Mariana's media trainer.
Okay, order, order, order. I think we've got everything in order. The Honourable Minister, and the Honourable Minister will start, and I'm sure everyone will be very quiet and listen to what he has to say. The Honourable Minister. From the top.
You would think that the Conservative Party of Canada would be in agreement with the platform of the Conservative Party of Canada's last election, but maybe not. Let me quote from said platform, Mr. Speaker. "Our plan will ensure that all Canadians can do their part to fight climate change in the way that works best for them, and a carbon price that is affordable, going to $50 a ton, Mr. Speaker. Further in the document, we will assess progress so that carbon price can be on a path to $170 a ton, Mr. Speaker." That is exactly what our government is doing. They said they were in favor of it last campaign. What's going on, Mr. Speaker?
Honourable Member for Banff Marjorie.
That sort of political answer is absolutely what makes Canadians lose faith in a government like that. One that is laughing at the discomfort that Canadians are facing because they're struggling to pay their bills. They're laughing at it, Mr. Speaker. So if this member and his Prime Minister really believe in their carbon tax, why don't they at least show some solidarity with those who are having to skip meals, with those 1 in 5 Canadians who are having to skip meals because they can't afford groceries? So maybe they'll show some solidarity and start skipping meals themselves because those Canadians can't afford to eat because of their carbon tax.
Hear, hear. The Honourable Minister of the Environment.
Mr. Speaker, climate change is no laughing matter. As we are faced with forest fires in Alberta, as people in Quebec, in Ontario, in British Columbia are faced with floodings, as climate change is costing Canadians, according to the Parliamentary Budget Officer in 2021.
I'm having a hard time hearing. The member for Niagara Falls is shouting in my ear. I'm going to ask him to maybe just keep it down, and we'll let the minister start over again.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Climate change is no laughing matter, as people in Edmonton are being and around Edmonton and Alberta are being evacuated because of forest fires in the beginning of the month of May, Mr. Speakers. As people in Quebec, Ontario, and BC are being evacuated because of floodings. As the Parliamentary Budget Officer says that in 2021, the cost to Canadians to climate change was $20 billion, Mr. Speaker. Climate change is no laughing matter. On this side of the House, we take the issue seriously. It seems that on that side of the House, they don't.
The Honourable Member.
Under this government costs more to live. The Parliamentary Budget Officer confirmed if the Prime Minister triples his carbon tax scam to 41 cents a litre on gas, with tax rising on heat and food, it would cost the average Alberta families an extra $2,800. Food costs in 2023 up an extra $1,000 compared to last year. More Canadians are visiting the food bank just to get by. Will the Prime Minister end his plan to triple the cost of gas, groceries, and home heating and cancel the carbon tax?
The Honourable Minister of Immigration.
Mr. Speaker, as my honourable colleague, the Minister of the Environment, pointed out just a few minutes ago, that member campaigned in the last federal election under a commitment to implement carbon pricing. The reality is we've discovered a way to make sure that we put a price on pollution that makes it more expensive for polluters to damage our atmosphere, at the same time that we put more money in the pockets of families. The reality is, from the moment that we formed government in 2015, we have been laser focused on affordability. We stopped sending child care checks to millionaires to put more money in the pockets of 9 out of 10 families. We were putting forward a grocery rebate that's going to help 11 million Canadian households, and we're putting a price on pollution that will clean our environment and leave families better off. I wish they'd finally get on board.
The Honourable Member for Montmagny-les-Lacs-Kamouraska-Rivière-du-Loup. Mr. Speaker, the price of everything has gone up since this Prime Minister came to power. A family of 4 has to pay $1,065 more to feed themselves. 1 out of 5 Canadians is skipping meals, and food banks are seeing record attendance. And what does this Prime Minister do? He increases the carbon tax, and contrary to what he says, this increase will have impacts across the country, even in Quebec. Will he finally put an end to his policies that are increasing the price of everything? The Honourable Minister of Sport. Mr. Speaker, what Canadians know is that right now the country is struggling with forest fires, with flooding, and with the impact of climate change. What Canadians know is that a responsible government does many things at the same time. So it fights climate change, and in addition, with our budget measures, we're helping the people who need it the most. That's what a responsible government does, but unfortunately the Conservatives have already said they're going to vote against this budget, so they're not helping Canadians. The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, yesterday the government finally expelled the Chinese operative who was involved in threatening the member for Wellington Halton Hills and his family. Yesterday. Not in 2021 when the government found out. Yesterday. In other words, this Chinese operative was not expelled for having threatened the member in 2021. He was expelled because his threats made headlines over the past week. The main problem of the Liberals is not the intimidation of elected member. It's that Canadians know that they did nothing. That is why they cannot be trusted to shed light on Chinese interference. When will there be an independent public inquiry? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary. to the Minister of Foreign Affairs. We take this matter very, very seriously. And when we had the confirmation, we took measures very quickly.
Chinese government, by yelling and screaming, by making noise on that side of the House, you get the attention of the Chinese government by taking direct action, by expelling a diplomat, and by doing it carefully and consciously. That's what we do on this side of the House. That's how.
Okay, I'm going to interrupt the honourable member. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary, I'm sorry, we missed the last 15 seconds of what you were saying, if you don't mind repeating it.
Case in point, you get the attention of the Chinese government to stop interfering in Canadians' lives by taking direct action and doing it carefully and prudently. That's exactly what the Minister of Foreign Affairs did this week when she declared persona non grata a Chinese diplomat. That's what we're doing this side of the House. We don't yell. We don't scream, we get attention, and we're effective and do it consistently.
The Honourable Member for Trois-Rivières. Mr. Speaker, it still took 2 years. The Liberals do nothing against Chinese interference as long as it doesn't make the headlines. Never have they cancelled their fundraising cocktails at $1,500 a head with their Beijing cronies. Never have they questioned the ties between a Liberal MP and Beijing. Never have they reacted to threats against an opposition member. Until it made the headlines, and then all of a sudden they became statesmen. The Liberals don't want to shed light on interference. They want to keep it in the dark, hoping that the media doesn't get a hold of it. When will we have a public independent inquiry? The Honourable Minister of Justice. Mr. Speaker, we responded to Chinese interference with concrete measures. We took concrete action, and my colleague, the Minister of Foreign Affairs, did so, unlike the opposition, who complain all the time.
The Honourable Member for Moose Jaw, Lake Centre, Lanigan.
Mr. Speaker, the Prime Minister has said he is investing in Canadians. In my community, people are struggling to make ends meet because of this government's inflationary carbon tax. Adding to record deficits and national debt is not investing in Canadians. Everyone knows you cannot borrow your way out of debt. Life is simply getting more expensive under this government. When will this government axe the tax and do something to help struggling Canadians?
The Honourable Minister for the Environment.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last year, the Conservative member for New Brunswick Southwest said, and I quote, "The backstop will kick in, the feds will take it over, and as part of that change, checks will begin to roll out to New Brunswick." Well, Mr. Speaker, dreams do come true because the Premier, the Conservative Premier of New Brunswick, said recently we need to make a choice that is in the best interest of New Brunswickers when asking the federal government to apply our system of carbon pricing to New Brunswick. And he said, and I quote again, "What this does right now is provide relief from inflation." Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Honourable Member for Moose Jaw, Lake Centre, Lanigan.
Well, Mr. Speaker, no one's buying what the Liberals are selling, but they certainly are paying for it. Carbon tax is not a price on pollution, it is a price on people. You know what, Mr. Speaker? Canadians need a bailout, just like my colleague from Louis Ste. Marie.
Okay. I don't know what it is today, but everybody knows what a prop is. So I'm going to ask, I'll let the Honourable Member, order. The Honourable Member for Moose Jaw, Lake Centre, Lanigan, please continue.
I'm sorry, Mr. Speaker, I thought it was a very catching photo. Canadians are out of money. So I'll ask this government that's out of touch, when will they axe the carbon tax and give reprieve to Canadians?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
Mr. Speaker, it seems that the Conservatives have an amnesia when it comes to investing in Canadians. In 2015, when the Liberals came into office, this country was ranked 24th in the OECD in terms of child poverty. 24th, Mr. Speaker. Since we've come into power, we've instituted the child benefit tax, we've instituted childcare, we're making life more affordable for Canadian families. They vote against it every single time. They don't invest in families, they don't invest in children, they don't invest in Canadians, they don't care.
Honorable député de Beauce.
The honourable member for Beauce. Mr. Speaker, the Liberal government does nothing to lower the price of food for Canadians. On the contrary, it seeks to implement policies that make food more expensive. The carbon tax and the fertilizer tariff have tied the hands of our farmers by increasing the production costs of everything. The use of food banks has never been so high, and 1 out of 5 Canadians it has to skip meals to survive. When will the government finally end these costly policies so that farmers can do what they do best, that is, feed our families? The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Agriculture. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As my colleague knows, he lives in a riding where pollution price has been applied since 2007, and as he knows, we have put in place a policy for food banks during COVID that gave money to all food banks, and once again to help Canadian families. We have another $10 million to invest, and I would urge all food banks across Canada to apply because they have until May 30th. Thank you.
Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill.
Monsieur le Président, la loi canadienne de la protection.
Mr. Speaker, the protection the Strengthening the Canada's Environment Act was tabled in the Senate on February 9, 2022, between 2 parliamentary committees. Some 50 hours were devoted to studying the bill, 80 witnesses were heard, and 105 briefs were submitted to for review to the committee. Can the Minister of the Environment and Climate Change update this House on Bill S5? Thank you. The Honourable Minister. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to begin by thanking the member for Aurora Oak Ridges, Richmond Hill for her question and for all her hard work on Bill S5 as a member of the Environment Committee. I'd also like to thank all members of NEV and NV who greatly contributed to strengthening this bill. As she said, 300 amendments were presented, 80 witnesses appeared, and 105 briefs were submitted. Mr. Speaker, I'd like to urge all members in this House to work together so that this bill receives royal assent as quickly as possible. Thank you.
Well, the Prime Minister's fangirling celebrities in the Big Apple, it seems like this finance minister is auditioning for her next career. She showed up to Fenway Park to talk about her budget more times this year than she has to the Finance Committee. They're always out of country, always out of touch, and Canadians are out of money. And after delivering one of the worst budgets in Canadian history, pile driving every household with $4,200 cost, she refuses to show up to the committee to answer basic questions about her failed budget. It's easier to find Nemo than it is to find this finance minister at the Finance Committee. Is she hiding because she's ashamed of her budget like the rest of us are?
The Honourable Minister for Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, our government is very proud of our budget, and it's wonderful to hear the Conservatives talk about affordability, Mr. Speaker, but guess what the Conservatives want to talk about at the Finance Committee?
I have to interrupt the Honourable Minister. I just want to remind the honourable members that if they want to ask a question, talk to their whip, get on the roster, and then they can ask the question. But while somebody else is answering, it's not parliamentary to shout across with a question. The Honourable Minister from the top so we can all hear the answer, please.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We are very proud of Budget 23 and all of the support measures in place to grow the economy, to support Canadians, to stabilize the healthcare system for a generation. But, Mr. Speaker, here's what the Conservatives want to talk about at Finance Committee. Mr. Speaker, they want to talk about the crimson carpets from the member from Abbotsford and the benefits of a steady diet of eels from the member from South Shore St. Margaret's. These people are not serious. They're reckless. They're stopping the progress of supports for Canadians. When will these people get serious?
Honourable member for South Shore St. Margaret's.
I can tell you what we're talking about at the Finance Committee. The fact that the Minister of Finance hasn't shown up in 6 months and has had 3 invitations to attend and has blown them all off. And since the Liberal government plans to spend $3.1 trillion answering a few questions in committee for 2 hours is the least she should do for her pay. Right. Will the Finance Minister stop hiding and testify for 2 hours, not 1, on her failed budget at the Finance Committee? Yes or no?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, the failure of the Conservatives is is to dictate that they're going to vote against a budget before they even see it. That is just the most ridiculous thing that we've seen in a long time in this House. But, Mr. Speaker, let me make a pledge in this House to the Conservatives. Should the filibuster stop, the Minister of Finance is scheduled to appear at Finance on Tuesday. End the filibuster, and they'll be able to hear directly from the Minister of Finance and Deputy Prime Minister.
The honourable member for Northumberland, Peterborough South.
Mr. Speaker, in most jobs, if you showed up only a handful of times in the first 5 months of work, you'd be fired. But that's exactly what this Minister of Finance has done. And then she has the audacity to ask Canadians to cough up $490 billion, but won't appear in front of their representatives for 2 hours. Yet we know she has time because she spent hours last weekend schmoozing with Liberal insiders and Liberal donors. When will these Liberals, when will this minister finally put Canadians ahead of Liberal insiders?
The Honourable Minister of Tourism.
Mr. Speaker, I am very glad to hear that the member opposite saw how successful a Liberal convention we had here in the nation's capital this last weekend. It was very energizing, Mr. Speaker. And on the substantive matter, we are working every day to get to support Canadians. The Finance Minister is scheduled to appear at Finance Committee on Tuesday. We hope the Conservatives stop the filibuster and listen to the Minister.
The honourable member for Yukon.
Mr. Speaker, every day in our communities, we see the urgent need for safe and culturally appropriate housing.
The honourable member for Yukon. I don't think everyone heard me the first time. Please.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Every day in our communities, we see the urgent need for safe and culturally appropriate housing for Indigenous women, children, and 2S LGBTQI+ people fleeing family and gender-based violence. They need safe shelter and a stable environment wherever they are in the country. Can the Minister of Housing and Diversity and Inclusion please tell this House more about the important action we're taking to support survivors and ensure they have the supports and services they need to recover from the trauma of their experiences?
Good question. The Honourable Minister for Housing.
I want to thank the Honourable Member for Yukon for his really important question and strong advocacy on this important issue. No relationship is more important to Canada than the one with Indigenous peoples, Mr. Speaker. And we know that far too many Indigenous women, children, and 2S LGBTQI+ people fleeing violence do not have the necessary supports. That is why yesterday I was pleased to join my colleagues to announce $103 million to support the creation of shelters and transitional housing in 21 communities across Canada. These projects will be Indigenous-led and will offer culturally appropriate wraparound supports. This is the National Housing Strategy at work, Mr. Speaker.
Member for Timmins, James Bay.
In Timmins, Thunder Bay, communities across Northern Ontario, the homeless crisis coupled with the toxic drug disaster has created a social catastrophe. In Timmins, funding for the groundbreaking Firekeepers proposal is running out, even though it is keeping Indigenous people alive on the streets. In Thunder Bay, the waiting list for housing is staggering. Social service boards and First Nations across the north are doing everything they can, and the question they ask is, where is the federal government? So will the Indigenous Service Minister commit to the Firekeepers and meet with Northern leaders to find a solution to the housing crisis?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, first of all, let me just thank the member for his constant advocacy for the support and safety of Indigenous people in urban settings. And Mr. Speaker, this government has been a strong partner to provinces and territories to ensure that people, no matter where they live in Ontario, indeed across the country, have access to supports and services that are culturally appropriate. I will commit to the member that I will meet with the Firekeepers and we will look for a solution together. This must be a work that the province of Ontario and the federal government does together.
Excellent. Honourable Member for London, Fanshawe.
Tenants on Webster Street in London were horrified to learn their apartment building was being sold to a corporate profiteering landlord. This month, 20 people are being rent evicted, including an 83-year-old woman on a fixed income. She will lose her home and simply cannot afford to move to a new place that will charge her double the rent. Will the government follow the NDP's plan to put a moratorium on rent evictions to stop corporate profiteering on affordable housing stock and protect Canadians who desperately just want to stay in their home?
The Honourable Minister of Housing.
Mr. Speaker, I share the honourable member's concern to make sure that we continue to protect vulnerable renters. That is why our government introduced the groundbreaking Canada Housing Benefit that is delivering rental supports to tens of thousands of vulnerable renters across the country. In addition to that, we introduced a top-up to the Canada Housing Benefit that has gone to almost 1 million Canadians. And so we will continue to make sure that we're there for Canadian renters. We will do our part to prevent rent evictions and the financialization of housing. But part of it is also building more rentals through the Rental Construction Financing Initiative, through the National Housing Strategy, Mr. Speaker.
I'm afraid that's all the time we have. C'est tout le temps que nous avons aujourd'hui pour la.
That's all the time we have for question period.
Okay.